Right. So we're looking at Hamlet Act 5. We're going to finish Hamlet today and move on to Othello. I don't want to skip over the conclusion of Hamlet because it ends quite spectacularly, but we're going to start in the grave. How about that? Fit place to start here. I mentioned last time that this scene it's quite interesting in some ways, and it seems like a bit of a digression as well. It's the comic interlude, so there are two clowns there who are with spades and mattocks, so they are the grave diggers, but they're called clowns by Shakespeare, so it is the sort of comic relief which the play has lacked. There hasn't been any funny figures here, unlike Lear. I guess I'm trying to think of Macbeth's not particularly amusing, right? But all the same. So we have a comic interlude here, but the purpose of it isn't really to break the mood so much as to reinforce the themes about death and what follows it and our attitudes towards that. And it does bring to a conclusion Ophelia's tragedy. So she doesn't just disappear from the stage, which the fool does in King Lear. It's just gone, and same with Cordelia. She's hanged, but there's nothing more of it. It ends before we can deal with it. Whereas here she's given we have the burial scene, and so she's given a great deal of time by Shakespeare. So I think one of the reasons she seems such a powerful character is precisely because of these things. But it's a scene in which the question is whether she's going to be buried in a Christian burial. That's the first clown. Is she to be buried in Christian burial when she willfully seeks her own salvation? And then the other, I tell thee she is, therefore make her grave straight. The crowner hath sate on her, and finds it Christian burial. How can that be? Unless she drown herself in her own defense. Why, 'tis found so. So the second clown is the straight man, the second is but they are asking a real question. And the first clown, it must be, say offendo, it cannot be else. For here lies the point. If I drown myself wittingly, it argues an act. And an act hath three branches. It is an act to do, to perform. Ergo, she drowned herself wittingly. Now he's trying to present the form of an argument here, ergo, etc. He calls it argle. And he's saying the same thing. It's three branches of an act. It's an act, it's to do, and it's to perform. Well, all these three are words for action, so there's no three branches of the argument at all. She did it. She took her own life, therefore she wasn't murdered, she took her own life. That's it, argle. Second clown, nay, but hear you, good man, Delver, give me leave. Here lies the water, good. Here stands the man, good. If the man goes to this water and drown himself, will be, nil he goes, mark you that. But if the water come to him and drown him, he drowns not himself. Argle, he that is not guilty of his own death shortens not his own life. But is this the law? Aye, Marius, Crowner's quest law, the crown attorney, the Crowner's quest law. Will you have the truth on it? If this had not been a gentlewoman, she would have been buried out of a Christian burial. So now she's getting a Christian burial because she is an important person. That's the suggestion. So it is humorous because the characters are humorous and they're clearly not able to make intelligent arguments, but their point is not unintelligent. And it's a legitimate question here. Is she? How did she take her own life, and what's the consequences for that? Because that's what the play has been about, the consequences of death and that certain type of death. Remember, his father was murdered, and he was murdered without having repented, so now he has apparently gone to hell. And so the question is, Ophelia, having taken her own life, where is she going to be? Well, she's buried in a church here. Well, what's going on with that? It's raising that question that Shakespeare raised at the first. He's raising it again just to make us think not to solve the question. He's not going to give us a solution, but to raise the question that was at the outset: what is our view of death and what comes after it? It's been throughout the whole play. Yes.
In writing my first paper, I spoke with the gravediggers, and I read that their speaking with each other, their dialogue together, and then with Hamlet when he arrives, is particularly similar to how lawyers would have been taught to present arguments.
Well, it's lawyerly stuff.
But their speech is like off, obviously. They say Argyle, so there go. And that's supposed to show the author presented that is showing that there's something off. And just another side.
The whole thing's off. Her death's off. Like everything's out of kilter. Mm-hmm. It's not right. And the legal arguments about it. But I mean, the point is here, we know in this life that there's a rule for the rich and there's a rule for the poor. You get treated differently. That's true. His question is that even true after death? Do we continue? Is there no justice? So that's the question, right? Because if I took my life, I wouldn't be getting buried here. I'll tell you that much. But she is getting buried here. And she drowned. Well, did the water come to her and drown her? No. Well, then she drowned, right? She drowned herself. She took her own life. That's his argument. Now, Hamlet in this scene, these gravediggers are a parody of Hamlet, by the way. And they do parody Hamlet throughout this. And he talks about the law furthermore. And he's obsessed with the idea that when he gets to the skull of Yorick, the idea that the body just decays to nothing. This really disturbs him. And it's the jester. So Yorick was the court jester. He has clowns here, but now he is the man who used to entertain him, used to ride on his back, have fun with him, and now he looks at him, and he doesn't have any lower jaw. He's got the upper jaw, right? It just detaches because now he looks at this skull, and he used to kiss the lips that were there. They're not there anymore. So it's a horrifying thought. So that is this all that becomes of a person after death? And so he's reflecting on you were a court jester. The final joke's on you. And then this leads him to comment on the deceptiveness of beauty. Then in 196. Is it 196? No, I'll go up a little bit further. It's 183. Alas, poor Yorick! I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath bore me on his back 1,000 times, and now how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rises at it. Here hung those lips that I have kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now, your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment, that were wont to set the table on a roar? Not one now to mock your own grinning, quite chop-fallen. Now get you to my lady's chamber, and tell her, let her paint an inch thick, to this favour she must come. Make her laugh at that. Prithee, Horatio, tell me one thing. What's that, my lord? Dost thou think Alexander looked at this fashion in the earth? Alexander the Great, when he died, did he look like this? Even so. And smelt so? Pah! Even so, my lord. To what base uses we may return, Horatio? Why may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander till it find it stopping a bunghole? 'Twere to consider it too curiously to consider so. No, faith, not a jot, but to follow him thither with modesty enough and likelihood to lead it. Alexander died, Alexander was buried, Alexander returneth to dust. The dust is earth, of earth we make loam, and why of that loam, whereto was he converted? Might they not stop a beer barrel? So you take the earth and they could stop a beer barrel with the dust of Alexander's bones. The great Alexander, imperious Caesar dead and turned to clay, might stop a hole to keep the wind away. That earth which kept the world in awe would patch a wall to expel the winter's flaw. But soft, while here comes the king, and now king, queen, Laertes, and so forth. So they're there at the graveyard, but Ophelia's not yet there. Or at least the funeral's not yet there. And they now come. But the deceptiveness of beauty, it suggests an eternity with it. And yet it's all of the masks of, you can paint that an inch thick, and it's not going to disguise this horror that I see in front of me now that you're dead. And then reflects on Alexander. However great he was, look at him. Is he just like this? Yeah, so there's an equality at the grave. Your station in life mattered not. Your beauty mattered not. When Ophelia is buried, Hamlet is... So this is the challenge. What have Hamlet's feelings for Ophelia been throughout the play? It's really hard to read because he's presented it so... in so many different ways. You know, he's spoken to her terribly. He said funny things. He's written her love notes. Like, what is his exact relationship? We get reports secondhand. We get them from Ophelia. We get from her father. We get them from the letters that are read. But then we hear his own direct speech, and it contradicts that. What was he doing here? When he jumps into the grave here, it suggests that he actually did love the girl, which we wouldn't have known beforehand. Although Ophelia said she thought that he did. But maybe she's just fancying that he did. I mean, we don't know that. We're not sure whether to regard her testimony as credible. But here now it appears that was the case. That's the tragedy. So it's like a Romeo and Juliet here. We've got two young people who love one another, and neither of them are going to be able to do what they want here. And now she's dead. So he is shocked, and it makes us feel even worse for Ophelia, the greater the tragedy is, but also it makes us like Hamlet more, I think. So he's not just, as Laertes suggested at the outset, well, he likes you because he fancies you, thinks you're pretty attractive, but, he's not going to be able to marry you. And right, there's no deceit in him. He actually does love the girl. So I think that there's a sense of tragedy in her demise, in his response, oh no, this is an aspect of the play which didn't come out at all. It's that frustrated love that led to her ultimate demise. Right? She's there in part because of a broken heart. Dad's dead by the hand of hand of the man she loved, who has rejected her and told her to get thee to a nunnery, called her as if she had tended towards being a whore, that sort of stuff, a horrible stuff. But when she's actually coming out to be buried, he wants to express his love for Ophelia so strongly. Now he's a rival with Laertes. It's a really odd thing, and doesn't make a lot of sense in one way. What's with the fight? I loved her more. Why would you fight with somebody's brother over this? It doesn't make... So there's no logic to it per se, but it shows how much he does care for her. That's all I think. And it doesn't do anything more than that. But the two of them now are demonstrating, and to some degree, so he's trying to outdo him in mourning. So once she's dead, his true feelings rise to the surface for the first time. He's been acting. We knew that anyway, but how deep the acting was. Is that inability to act, this is the question I want to raise, and that's going to deal with the rest of the act, is the problem of inaction. Remember we said he was not a man of action, he's a man of contemplation, he couldn't act. Is that actually resolved by the end of the play? We're going to see what's his name, Fortinbras come in, the man of action at the end. Certainly capable of action. We see Laertes, whom he's going to fight, is a man of action. Does Hamlet, in the end, is he able to act? And Horatio is a foil for Hamlet in the sense that he's like Hamlet. He's a man of thought. He's a man after his own heart. His very heart of hearts, he says. He loves Horatio. He's a thinker like him. Well, when he's contemplating death, he is thinking about not only the world as it is, but as it will become, because this is the issue. He doesn't want to live anymore, Hamlet. He doesn't want to live in this world. It's such a horrible thing. He's been so disenchanted by what has happened. He's been reconciled to his mother. That's good, but does he really want to carry on in this life? He doesn't really want to. And so he's obsessed with, okay, if this world is so filled with injustice and corruption, what will it be like after death? He had hoped for better things, but he's seen his father burning. And now Ophelia drowned. Suggestion she took her own life. What will await me after the grave? So he's thinking deeply about these things, and he needs to be clear in his own mind. He's that sort of man. He needs to know what he's doing and why, and he's going to plan it. He's quite careful in some ways. So it's the world not as it is, but as it will become. And he's trying to reconcile thought and action. Does he succeed? Well, I think to some degree he does. To some degree he's able to suspend his own desire for full knowledge of things, and he throws himself into it to some degree, and is able to recognize that in the end we can't see providence before the fact. We have to do the right thing in the moment, whatever it is, and then trust that God will deal with consequences. Before this, he was not willing to settle with that. He was so paralyzed by fear or his own intellectual tendencies not to want anything but perfection. But now in the end, he seems to be liberated, at least so that he's able to do something and just wait and hope and trust that there is providential ordering of all things. So I think that seems to be where he ends up. There's a certain faith that God will lead him in some way. So when it comes to scene 2, he's discussing with Horatio here, so much for this, sir, says Hamlet. How now shall you see the other? You do remember all the circumstance? Remember it, my lord? Sir, in my heart there was a kind of fighting that would not let me sleep. Methought I lay worse than the mutinies and the bilboes. Rashly, and praised be rashness for it, let us know our indiscretion sometimes serves us well. There you go. Sometimes we can act without discretion. Sometimes it serves us well when our deep plots do pall, and that should learn us there's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will. Famous lines. There's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them though we will. Okay, so God in the end is providential. We cannot see all ends, but he can. We will try and, as best we can, make plans, think things through, but in the end, we have to act on imperfect knowledge. That's where he's come to. That famous line there in 10. So Act 5, Scene 2. And then Horatio, that is most certain. You're right. So it's a theological discussion, really. And so he has a certain faith, and now he's able to act on that. Now he doesn't know what the plan is, but he trusts that there is some sort of ordering in things. Now why he's come to that conclusion, it's not entirely clear. But there's an internal evolution of the character so that he has moved on to the point where he is now capable of acting. And one of those things is he's going to murder Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, which I'm not sure we wholly are reconciled to as a good action. But his judgment is, Horatio, 56, Guildenstern and Rosencrantz go to it. Why, man, they did make love to this employment. They are not near my conscience. Their defeat does by their own insinuation grow. 'Tis dangerous when the baser nature comes between the pass and fell incensed points of mighty opposites. They got caught in a power play, and they willingly did so. Their motive was power, and they were very happy to do an evil deed. It wasn't, so I'm not worried about them. They got what they deserved. He's reconciled in his mind. Even though it's not a perfect, well, they willingly did an evil deed, and they were knowledgeable of it. And they got caught in a power game, so therefore, yes?
Would Shakespeare's audience have seen their actions as treason against the rightful king?
Treason against friend, for sure. against the rightful king. Well, by this point, we're aware that Claudius is, although he's crowned the king, he's in fact a tyrant, right? And their understanding of a tyrant is an unjust ruler and needs to be deposed. In fact, it's lawful to remove him and to oppose him, and so they're instruments of a tyrant. And therefore, I don't think there's any concerns about that in his audience's mind. So it's just because he wears the crown doesn't make him the legitimate king.
No, I meant the actions of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Oh, yes, I know. Yeah, sorry. Well, he's not lawfully ordained in the sense that he hasn't been crowned, but he is the legitimate heir, and he's certainly their friend. So I think they would see it as a treasonous act of sorts. Although I don't know if treason would be the word here because he's not actually on the throne. They're betraying a friend, that much they know. They don't actually know that that he is the lawful heir, right? So I don't think it.
Wouldn't they know
Even if
because they were childhood friends, wouldn't they know his father?
Oh gosh, yes, of course. But the fact that the uncle's on, so this is one of my puzzles in the play as well. There doesn't seem to be much discussion about like why is nobody saying shouldn't Hamlet be shouldn't it be Hamlet? Like what's going on here? And I don't know. And Shakespeare doesn't answer that. But it doesn't seem to be a problem for people. It doesn't even be like Gertrude could say, well, I have a son. We had a son. He's now of age. Here's the king. It doesn't trouble her. And Hamlet doesn't raise it either. He doesn't mention it. You know, actually, I have a lawful right, and I should be the king, not the man who married you. He doesn't even raise that, nor does Hamlet's father's ghost. So, but I've often wondered that, like, what's going on here?
How old do we assume Hamlet to be then?
Well, he's gone to university, but that doesn't mean that much. That's a very good question. Because universities, like nowadays, you finish high school and so forth, but that point, it's just when you've attained the capacity to go, and people go as young as 12. Now, I assume that he's not a 12-year-old, that he's somewhat older. I mean, he has this relationship with Ophelia, and it seems permissible and so forth, so he seems somewhat older, but he could be a teenager. But he's gone off to university in Wittenberg and come back, and he seems like he's a little bit older. All of them are a little bit older. But when I say old, I mean the age of most of the people here are that old, yeah. And so of age to be but actually if you're a 12-year-old, you're considered to be a majority, and he would be the lawful heir at that point. It's happened in English history that it's primogeniture and the firstborn, and you would be the lawful king rather, and you just wouldn't be able to exercise it. So you would have somebody as the regent looking over and helping you to the point where you can exercise it yourself. But it's not even mentioned here as a possibility. So I don't know why it's not raised, other than that Shakespeare's not interested in that aspect of the play. But it's a glaring omission, because it seems like the legitimacy of the power, that would be an aspect of it, right? I would have thought. Yes?
So, on some quick research.
You mean you looked at the internet?
I did look at the
Yeah, research. Yeah, okay.
Denmark was one of the few kingdoms at the time that was an elected monarchy, along with Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth.
Okay.
So it is some people assume that because of Hamlet's absence at school,
That something has happened and so forth, yeah.
that they've elected Claudius because he's away.
And that's as good an explanation as any, because it's a non-issue in the play.
And people then would have known about it.
Yeah. I mean, Denmark in this day is not like Denmark, the nation state of our day. It's just an area, and often it like we see this even actually with Fortinbras. Denmark and Norway are often the exchanging kings, or the king of one is also the king of the other, and vice versa. Just like France and England often, the French king is sometimes the English king, and vice versa. So, and under different kings there are different rules, and so. But that is the best explanation, because it's just not an issue in the play. So it's not, to answer your question then, it's not a rebellion against the lawful heir, because I guess if there's some It's just not. It's not raised as an issue. But if I had, like you, I'm thinking, isn't this treasonous? Yeah, but he doesn't. Hamlet himself does not even raise it, nor does anyone else. So that's not an issue. So Hamlet is able. So he murders his friends, and he's not bothered by it. His conscience is clear, he says. And Horatio is appalled by the actions of Claudius. Horatio says, 63, why, what a king is this that would use men for such maliciousness? He's disgusted by Claudius. And then Hamlet, does it not, think thee, stand me now upon, he that hath killed my king and whored my mother, popped in between the election and my hopes, there you go, thrown out his angle for my proper life, and with such cozenage, is it not a perfect conscience to quit him with this arm? Do not I have every right to kill him? Because he's thinking of his own legitimacy, of the action. He doesn't want to see, he's thinking about what's going to happen to my soul if I kill the legitimate heir. Is he legitimate? And is it not to be damned to let this canker of our nature come in further evil? Question Shakespeare asks all the time. If there's an evil, it needs to be uprooted. It needs to be taken care of. And otherwise, the cancer will spread throughout the kingdom and destroy it. Am I not right in my action? Horatio, it must be shortly known to him from England what is the issue of the business there. It will be short. The interim's mine. And a man's life's no more than to say one. And I am very sorry, good Horatio, that to Laertes I forgot myself. For by the image of my cause I see the portraiture of his. So he recognizes in Laertes another good man with just cause. I'll court his favors. But sure, the bravery of his grief did put me into a towering passion. Okay, so all that discussion is interesting. And it seems that Hamlet finds a means of action only by acting, performance. And he suggests that even at 5 scene 2 line, oh gosh, where is it? 48? I got 48 in my notes. Is this correct? Not sure about that. Or is it 480 something? Does it go on that long? Oh, maybe it does go on that long. No, it doesn't. But not over 480, so I don't know where it is in my notes. But Hamlet is now involved in a fencing match. Now this is a sort of theater, because it's a fight to the death, and Hamlet is defending himself. Laertes is fighting on behalf of Claudius. Claudius, who's a coward to the end. Arranged by Osric the courtier, who's a dandy. He's a bit effeminate. Hamlet despises him for whatever reason. He just, really he just expresses just an unbridled contempt, not quite sure why, but it's there. And Laertes knows what the purpose of this fight is. He's there to kill Hamlet, and he's got a sword unbaited with poison on the tip. He's there to kill him. Hamlet thinks it's just a fencing match. So, and the audience is aware of both situations. Hamlet is able to act in that. Now, when that happens, that he is stuck with the poison or finds out about the poison, then he acts in a very different way. It changes from being a contest, the action in the play, so he's able to do it as long as it was a game. Okay, I can do the fencing. But when his blood's up and an outrage has been done and he's not able to think, then he can act. So even at the end, as I say, is the question, has he been able to resolve his ability to think with his ability to act? Or can he only act when he is acting on impulse without thinking? And it seems to me, even in the end, he isn't really able to think about it much. He just acts immediately. He's outraged and so forth and acts that way. And when he does this, he turns evil against itself, which is also interesting. Because it's a theological presentation in some ways, that evil is its own enemy and in the end it consumes itself. Just as we saw in in Macbeth, that Macbeth, even the natural order of things seems to turn against him and everything conspires against him. So evil is allowed to persist for a time. It gets more and more wicked, blacker and blacker, but in the end it just sort of vanishes because there's nothing to nourish it anymore. Just like cancer. Cancer only survives as long as there's body for it to prey on. It doesn't feed itself. It feeds on good cells. Just like evil is portrayed that way in Shakespeare's play. It's like a weed. It enwraps itself around good plants, but once they're gone, the weed dies. So Claudius initiates the action, not Hamlet. And Hamlet reacts. And his last conclusive actions in the play are through a state of death. He's got a fatal wound, and this is the precondition he set for himself to be or not to be, comes to fulfillment right there. He's going to be and not to be. His last act is to pass on his legitimacy to Horatio and to Fortinbras. He recognizes both of them, acknowledges Fortinbras as his legitimate heir. Interesting. So legitimate, he's the legitimate, not Claudius. Claudius wasn't. He was it. And he recognizes him, and he says this as a public declaration. It's important because otherwise Fortinbras is a usurper as well, and there'll be an uprising against Fortinbras. Hamlet wants a unity. He doesn't want his kingdom in a sort of a civil war. Because remember, there's a private evil and a public evil. Ironically, the private evil is done by Claudius, who's the king, but he's been doing it secretly. He hasn't ordered his arrest. He's going to poison him, act like a brigand, a thief, an outlaw, even though he represents the law. He's going to have to do it duplicitously. So that's the private evil that Claudius has represented. The public evil is the threat to Denmark itself by Fortinbras. In the end, the private evil is pronounced to be acceptable by Hamlet. And in part because Fortinbras had a just cause. His father was killed by Hamlet's father. So it's a fitting end for him. Very interesting. And when Fortinbras does march in with the English ambassadors, there are drums and colors and attendants, all very not just militaristic, but quite dramatic. You know, the drumming coming in, the colors, you can imagine it's a war scene. He comes in, announced by Osric, 349, young Fortinbras with conquest come from Poland to the ambassadors of England gives this warlike volley. Hamlet, oh, I die, Horatio. The potent poison quite o'ercrows my spirit. I cannot live to hear the news from England. But I do prophesy the election lights on Fortinbras. He has my dying voice. So tell him, with the occurrence more and less, which have solicited, the rest is silence, and then dies. So he makes it publicly known that he is his legitimate heir, and he wants Fortinbras to be told it. So he is at peace himself that actually justice hasn't been done. It's an interesting thing. It's a very thoughtful act in his dying breath. Brings peace. And now Horatio, now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. Why does the drum come hither? Enter Fortinbras with the ambassadors. Where is this sight, says Fortinbras. What is it you would see, said Horatio, if aught of woe or wonder? Cease your search. This quarry cries on havoc. O proud death, what feast is toward in thine eternal cell, that thou so many princes at a shot so bloodily hath strook. And then the first English ambassador says, the sight is dismal, and our affairs from England come too late. The ears are senseless that should give us hearing to tell him his commandment is fulfilled, that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Where should we have our thanks? Not from his mouth. Had it the ability of life to thank you. He never gave commandment for their death. Is that true? Doesn't say, it doesn't,
It doesn't say he gave the command.
No.
But he does think it. He for sure.
yeah. So I don't-
That they need to go, but it never says he does.
Yeah, it's a little ambiguous, but doesn't name them or anything like that. There's an assumption, so it's playing with the situation. But he never gave commandment of their death, for their death. But since so jump upon this bloody question, you from the Polack Wars and you from England are here arrived. Give order that these bodies high on a stage be placed to the view. Honor the dead. And let me speak to the yet unknowing world how these things came about. Horatio wants all to know the treachery. How shall you hear of carnal, bloody, and unnatural acts, of accidental judgments, casual slaughters, of deaths put on by cunning and force caused, and in this upshot purposes mistook, fallen on the inventors' heads? All this can I truly deliver. Let us haste to hear it, says Fortinbras, and call the noblest to the audience. For me, with sorrow I embrace my fortune. I have some rights of memory in this kingdom, which now to claim my vantage doth invite me. Horatio, of that I shall have also cause to speak, and from his mouth, the dead Hamlet, whose voice will draw on more. But let this same be presently performed, even while men's minds are wild, lest more mischance on plots and errors happen. So let's make peace before there's more unintended deaths and more chaos. Fortinbras, let four captains bear Hamlet like a soldier to the stage, for he was likely, had he been put on, to have proved most royal. And for his passage the soldiers' music and the right of war speak loudly for him. Take up the bodies. Such a sight as this becomes the field, but here shows much amiss. Go bid the soldiers shoot. It's the shot of announcing the dead, the deceased. So the theater, the close of the play, the device that Shakespeare uses is a public funeral. Just like Ophelia had one, it's that. There's a strong sense of closure and of justice having been done, and a terrible loss of a life by a duplicitous act to the very end. But public good has come from the private evil that's done. And the threat of the public evil in Fortinbras has turned out, because of Hamlet's last act to pronounce him legitimate, he has now brought peace to the kingdom. There won't be any further conflict. Very important. So his last act in dying was a thoughtful pronunciation that has brought about the peace at the end of the play. Quite extraordinary. I'll leave it off at that and we'll pick up Othello. So let me just kill that.